You're listening to the Colts Blue Zone Podcast with Mike Chappell and Dave Griffiths.
Inside the Fox 59 CBS 4 podcast studio, welcome to another Colts Blue Zone podcast. Alongside Joe Hopkins, I'm Dave Griffiths. We're giving the venerable Mike Chappell a week off to enjoy himself before things crank up for the NFL draft for him and, of course, for us as well. But we are now 1 month out, Joe, from the draft. We are going to discuss this week at the NFL owners meetings what Chris Ballard and Jim Irsay had to say with some wide-ranging topics, but we're going to open with a focus on one of those topics in a minute. Also later, peeking at some draft prospects, as we will do from now until the NFL draft, of some top needs that the Colts have. We all estimate this offseason, and that'll be, like I said, cornerback to see who some of the top prospects in this draft are, and a couple of the day 2 and day 3 guys that we might have our eyes on as well. But we do begin with the prime topic of discussion at the NFL owners meetings when it comes to Jim Irsay and Chris Ballard out there, of course, and that is the status of Lamar Jackson. Because everyone knows, Joe, the Colts need a quarterback. Everyone knows the Colts have been willing in the past to take a swing at some veteran guys instead of draft and develop. So it's a move that from the outside makes sense in that area. Here from the inside, from covering the Colts, it's obvious that there is a leaning away from going after a veteran. They instead would more likely want to draft and develop their own guy. But it completely depends on if the Colts stay at 3, if the Colts like what they see at 4 rather in the NFL draft, and then what they think about Lamar Jackson. So that's kind of just the groundwork for our coming discussion. And we've discussed, as you know, Lamar Jackson in weeks past, but now we have a little bit of a little bit of the thoughts from Chris Ballard and Jim Irsay on the matter this week.
Yeah, and Jackson on Monday making it public that he has requested a trade from the Ravens, not even at that time, but March 2nd, he said he requested a trade from the Ravens, really put more of a spotlight back on Jackson and this situation, doing it, pretty smart timing to do it while the owners meeting is going on, while Jim Harbaugh is at the podium, not only kind of as a, sticking your nose up at the Ravens, but also all the GMs and coaches and everything are right there. If you want to get a deal done and get out of Baltimore, that's a good time to do it. Get people talking while all the important names are in the same room there. But Jackson now saying that he wants out of Baltimore instead of, just not being able to agree yet on a contract adds a whole nother step and element to this situation.
Yeah, poor Harbaugh in this process, his head coach there in Baltimore. Like he stands up there, is like, we're looking forward to seeing him. Like I hope we see him. I don't think, John, that you're going to see Lamar Jackson anytime soon. First of all, if he gets what he wants and he gets traded. Second of all, he's on a contract that I don't think he wants to play for right now. So if you see him, it's not going to be for a long time. It's not going to be until training camp or the regular season or darn late in training camp. He's completely unhappy with his situation there. He wants to get out. And as evidenced, like you said, by the fact that he has publicly now requested a trade, let everyone know that he requested a trade now 4 weeks ago, virtually. So the Ravens have known his intentions for that much time. Sports Illustrated's Destin Adams has reported that a Colts plane had an extended stay in Baltimore this week. Now, I don't know if there's just some things the Mayflower vans didn't pick up. They needed to go back and, bring it over to Indy. But nevertheless, with everything going on right now with certain quarterbacks, that's also a piquing some interest here in these parts, Joe.
Yeah, and the Colts wouldn't be doing their jobs if they didn't at least look into this. We are talking about a superstar quarterback, MVP quarterback. When he's on the field, he completely changes the game, and such a unique player that I don't think we've ever quite seen at the quarterback position. We've had quarterbacks who are outstanding runners of the football, Michael Vick, Cam Newton, but not quite in the same way that Lamar Jackson is. He's almost if you took Vick and Newton and morphed them together, like a mix between them two, and he might be a better passer than both of them.
Yeah, I grew up, as everyone who listens to this show religiously knows, outside of Philadelphia, and watching Randall Cunningham in some of his early years. That was my introduction to football, to the NFL, and he was very much an electric quarterback like that. One of the first ones, one of the first ones of this. To kind of spawn this new era, I think, of
the dual threat.
Exactly. Like you look at him, you look at Steve Young, you look at Warren Moon. There's a slew of guys right there in the 80s to 90s that really maybe it's not the original. Like if you have to go all the way back to Fran Tarkenton or other guys too, of course, but it's really the new age, the new wave that we have now that makes it more commonplace. Those guys being as good as they were, and guys like Moon and Young being Pro Football Hall of Famers, really solidified the fact that this is not just plausible, but this is here to stay. It just gave offenses so much more. They made offenses so much more of a threat, I should say. So anyway, Cunningham was an elite, was a great runner, and was a boomer. Like he could throw the ball a mile, and that's why he and Randy Moss did so well when he went to Minnesota later in his career. Those were his strengths specifically, and Lamar has obvious strengths that made him an NFL MVP, and made him before that a Heisman Trophy winner. And people didn't believe he could be a quarterback in the NFL, and he completely proved them wrong. But at the same time, like I said a couple weeks ago as we discussed Lamar, he's had significant injury problems the past couple years, and that was my big hang-up in signing Lamar. Like if you can get Lamar Jackson, give away 2 first-round picks, I think if you know that he's going to be healthy, that's fine. That is more than fine with me.
It's a bargain.
Exactly. And I don't care if one of them is the 4th pick overall. That's great. Like you've been seeking this quarterback for so long. He clearly has the talent. He clearly has the ability. He has the mindset. He has some kind of a chip on his shoulder, which I love with quarterbacks or with anybody really in the league. Like the guys that haven't had things handed to them on a silver platter, that he's worked really hard to get where he is. But those injuries just scare the heck out of me that he's had the last 2 seasons. And that's part of the process that Chris Ballard, Jim Irsay, Shane Steichen are all going through right now. Chris Ballard said about Lamar Jackson at the owners' meetings this Tuesday, quote, "Anytime a special player is available, which he is, you got to do the work. I'm not going to get into deep discussions on where it's at, what we're doing, or what we might do, but he's a really special player. You never know how any of this will work out." So there's your first little nugget. The Colts are in. The Colts are in on Lamar Jackson. Don't know how much they're in. Don't know if they just have paid the big blind and, they're waiting for the action to come around to them and see what happens. Don't know if they just have had significant further discussions with Lamar Jackson, if that plane there was for a significant reason or not. But from Chris Ballard, we know that at least the Colts are not like some other teams, Joe, that have outright said we are not interested at all in Lamar Jackson. They're saying that, yeah, we're doing our due diligence here to see what works and what doesn't work for us.
Yeah, they're in on him as a player, and I think, this veteran quarterback carousel that they've been on and have been public about wanting to get off of, the exception is a 26-year-old MVP. This isn't a castaway. This isn't a Carson Wentz when his team that drafted him and signed him to a contract extension all of a sudden wants to dump him and get rid of him and move on. This isn't Matt Ryan or Phillip Rivers at the end of their careers. This is a player who is choosing to leave the team he's on, not the team saying we don't want you anymore. And that's what makes the situation different, and that's why the Colts have to look into it.
You're right. And then the main difference, you could strike some similarities between the Carson Wentz and Lamar Jackson, but they are markedly different because Baltimore would bring Lamar Jackson back if his asking price wasn't what it was. If they were both on the same page as to what they both wanted and to pay or to receive, whatever. Like Carson Wentz and the Eagles were done, and they were moving on. Period. The money was not really a factor in that scenario. This money is a significant factor with with Lamar Jackson. We'll get into what Jim Irsay, who's the money man, had to say about that in just a few minutes. But a couple things from Irsay first. I'm specifically trading for Lamar Jackson. Quote, "It's a really tough decision. I'll be honest with you. The 3 of us," meaning him, Chris Ballard, Shane Steichen, "are open to anything that's going to make us better." And I think Joe, any triumvirate across the NFL is going to say the same thing. We're open to anything that makes us better, you know. But within that, there's so much wiggle room. Like, what makes us better? What makes us better this year? What makes us better in 3 years? What makes us better in 10 years? Those are really the discussions that they're making now. And I think Shane Steichen, as a head coach, you bring him in. The Colts right now are at a position, more so even than the last year or two, where they're willing to look 10 years into the future instead of 3 years into the future, because there was somewhat of a reset after firing Frank Reich, after moving on to a new coach, a new coaching staff on offense specifically. And so I think it maybe in the years past with Rivers, with Wentz, with Ryan, they were thinking 2 or 3 years into the future. Now I think that focus is shifting this offseason to something even further. And so the question is, can Lamar Jackson fit into that future for the Colts when you're thinking 8 to 10 years down the road?
Yeah, and I think they had to confront that reality when the team fell flat on their face this past season. I mean, the past couple of years, they've been operating as if they were just a quarterback away, and this team's ready to compete right now. They thought they had the quarterback to do that, and they went out there, and there was a lot of issues, not just quarterback play, but all over. Specifically the offensive line. The offense wasn't very explosive. There were problems with this team. Now, you know, not to go down a rabbit hole here, but
that's what we do on this show. You go right ahead, Joe.
I would say the moves the Colts have made this offseason have not exactly screamed rebuild to me. And we can get into more of that a little later in the show. So I'm kind of confused as to what exactly their plan is to do this offseason. Are they trying to rebuild and build this thing back up from the bottom? Are they just trying to keep adding play? I don't know. We'll see in the draft. I think the draft is going to have a big impact on what the Colts do going forward. But certainly the team has to start looking now that maybe if not competing this year is okay, if we're in an overall better place 2 or 3 to 5 years from now than we would be if we went all in on this year.
Another quote from Irsay: "You're always looking at salary cap, draft picks, which are like gold. Our belief and my belief is you build through the draft." That's what he and Chris Ballard, that's one reason they get along so well, is because they hold the same opinion about the draft. They hold the same opinion about picks. I love them picks. It is hard for Chris Ballard to get rid of draft picks, to trade them. He's done them in certain instances. Notably for me, the first one I remember is the Kari Willis deal. He traded up to get Kari, who turned into a really good player until he wanted to retire from the NFL. That's nothing on Chris Ballard evaluating talent. Traded up for Nick Cross last year, who Colts fans certainly hoping to see more of him this year than they did last year. But it's less often that he moves picks to move his way up in the draft. It's so much more often that he moves picks to move down, gathers picks, and then just the more darts you can throw at the dartboard, the more chance you have of hitting what you want. And like Irsay said, they're like gold. And if you have the 4th overall pick, that's like as pure gold as it gets right now.
Yeah, and history has also shown if Ballard thinks he has a chance to get an elite player, he will trade draft picks. He did a first rounder for Buckner. He did a 1st and a 3rd for Carson Wentz. Like he loves those draft picks, but if he thinks he can get an elite proven commodity, or at least a player like in Wentz's case at the most valuable position, he will pay the asking price.
It's a good point. Another quote from Irsay: "It really has nothing to do with actual dollars. I mean, paying a contract like that is not a problem. The issue is what's the right thing to do for the franchise in terms of what helps us win in the long run." So that's another thing that really, honestly, I had some questions about with this. Some questions, not every question, because there was one point in this Colts franchise where they made Peyton Manning the highest paid quarterback ever. They made Andrew Luck the highest paid quarterback ever, or even player in the NFL. I think for both of those two, if I'm not mistaken. But so that sense in terms of dollars and cents is not a big deal. But the issue, and we'll get into it next about guaranteed contracts. If you're talking about dollars and cents, when you make a guaranteed deal, you have to put all this guaranteed money in escrow. And if Jim Irsay is saying the money itself is not really the problem, I think that he probably includes that early on you have to make this financial commitment, not just 10 years, saying over 10 years this is going to be the commitment. But right now, this is a big financial commitment for the franchise. And I don't think, from what it sounds like, that would be trouble for Jim Irsay. But again, the question is it right to invest that much, and is it right to invest that much in the future of your franchise? If it's just dollars and cents, Joe, if we're not talking about guaranteed money, if you have the quarterback, you pay the quarterback. Like, in my opinion, and I think it's probably yours too, but I'm not going to speak for you. We'll let you speak for you. I'd imagine like the dollars and cents, like Jim Irsay said, is not that big of a deal. He says the question is if it's right for the franchise. When in the long run, it is right for a franchise to pay quarterbacks big money if it's the right quarterback that can win football games.
And that kind of brings him back to maybe he's questioning that. And I think, we can go ahead and get in the rest here. As an owner, I don't believe in fully guaranteed contracts. I think that percentage is one thing, but from what I've seen from the NBA and baseball, I don't see it as a positive competitively. And he also goes in to talk about you have to have the quarterback, but to go where you want to go, everyone knows you need more than just a quarterback. You have to find the way to get that more. The best way to find it is the top 3 rounds in the draft. Those first 3 rounds, you start giving away those gold nuggets. Oh, boy, I tell you. Also making sure cap-wise you can be in good position. He added, I look at this as an opportunity because if you have a rookie quarterback, you're going to have a chance for those first years to really have those extra dollars to make the team better. I think that's what he's alluding to when he's saying make the team better, in the next 5 years. I think when he weighs in his head paying Lamar Jackson the money it would take to make him happy right now and building up the rest of the team around him, given what the team looked like last year, compared to going for a rookie quarterback on a rookie deal when you really have so much more money to work with to build up the rest of the roster, I think those are the two things that he's juggling. Is it worth it to pay Lamar Jackson and get a proven elite quarterback, but maybe not be able to make the moves you want to on the rest of your team or retain the players you'd like to on the rest of your team? Or is it better to draft a young quarterback, hope he ends up being successful in the NFL, and then you can put more around him?
So it's also to the point that you made earlier, and the point that we have made on this podcast over the weeks, and really for some of us for a year now, that there are a lot of holes on this roster that need to be filled. That a quarterback, they're not just a quarterback away. So if you bring in Lamar Jackson right now, it's like, okay, so what's the point in some aspect? And I don't mean to completely dismiss it, because I think Lamar is a talent that can raise the talent of everyone else around him for sure. But you expect young receivers like Pittman and Pierce to get better. You expect guys like Jelani Woods to get better. You expect a guy, all those guys to get better. But at the same time, you know that it's a hole on the roster that you have. And so if you're just asking, so what exactly are you asking of Lamar if you bring him in, is what I'm, I guess, trying to ask or trying to say. The point being, like, if you want to bring him in and say, hey, you're kind of along for the ride as we figure out this cap situation all around you, as we try to work around the number that you're demanding here, the work around how that fits into the cap. Like Chap always says here on this podcast, the salary cap, you can make it work, and you can, but it's not easy for an owner to do so. It's not easy for a GM to do so. You can't just go out and get anybody. But all that to say, I think it's a tight corner that the Colts would put themselves in if they go out and get Lamar Jackson, at least for the short term, and with a roster around them that still is in obvious need of some improvement. They would need to hit on some things and maybe get some free agents to come here on a rate that would not be the most expensive rate. And maybe some would do that to play with Lamar Jackson, but at the same time, if you look at the Colts right now, like I don't know what team, what free agent out there is eyeing the Colts, even with Lamar Jackson, and saying, you know what, that's what tips the scales for me. You know, I'd want to come and play there. Like there are plenty of other places that are closer to being title contenders, other quarterbacks that are just as good, especially in the AFC, that are just as appealing to play with. So I just don't know in that sense how the move seriously tips the scales in the Colts' favor, at least right away.
Yeah, if the Colts to take the swing and pay Lamar Jackson, they'd basically be doing the Rams method of we're going to go all in right now. If we win a Super Bowl, it's worth it. It doesn't matter that in 2023, as we're seeing now, that our roster is in complete disarray and we basically have to rebuild, but we're stuck with old contracts and Matthew Stafford, who's 35 and has a bad back now, and all these different things. And Jim Irsay knows that, and that's why he's talking about 5 years from now. He wants the franchise to be in a state where it's continuously in good shape in terms of being able to make moves to try and be a contender. I don't think the Colts just want to be relevant. Lamar Jackson instantly makes the Colts relevant, but the ultimate goal is to win a Super Bowl.
Yeah.
So does adding Lamar Jackson make you a legitimate Super Bowl contender if it means that maybe you can't resign a Michael Pittman Jr. or Jonathan Taylor, or at least not both of them? And then all of a sudden we have a situation like we see with the Ravens where they have Lamar Jackson but not a lot of weapons for him, which the Ravens is kind of inexcusable because they've had him on a rookie contract for 5 years. Probably part of the reason he wants out of Baltimore. But it's a lot to juggle. Obviously, if Lamar Jackson did come to Indianapolis, I would be excited. That's an exciting quarterback to watch. The team is instantly probably at least twice as good as what we saw last year. But there are some legitimate concerns in terms of being able to continuously build up the roster that needs work. And, of course, as you mentioned, Jackson not being able to finish each of the past 2 years. Something we also haven't talked about, Irsay says fully guaranteed contracts. I think that's a big deal in this situation now. Lamar Jackson's never said what he's wanted or what he's asked for, so we don't know exactly what it is. But I think owners are taking a hard stance against the Deshaun Watson contract and saying, we're not doing this. This is not becoming the new normal. We're going to do everything we can to make sure this was a one-off and that we don't have to start paying these guys the kind of contracts that hamper the rest of our teams.
Yeah, it was interesting what Irsay said about that, saying, I do not believe in fully guaranteed contracts. And Jim Irsay, in one sense, is an owner, I think one of the few owners that has the pulse of other owners in the league, all the other owners, or the respect of all the other owners, so that, like, if you want to help steer the NFL in a direction, I think there are limited owners who could do that. Jim Irsay is among that group. Jerry Jones is among that group. Jeffrey Lurie in Philadelphia. The Mars in New York.
Robert Kraft.
The Kraft absolutely is up there. Thank you. The Pittsburgh, is it Rooney's? And then in the Chiefs as well. All these old. Hey, that's
they are old.
Right. Yeah, they are old. To be fair, but these families who have been in football forever and who know the NFL and have seen it through this era to the next. And the Irsays, being from Bob to Jim, are among that group of, I don't know, maybe 8 to 10 owners of the 32 out there that could have the clout to do this and to shift the NFL in a different direction here when it comes to contracts. But what reason do you have to do so? Like, what, as an owner, it's not necessarily beneficial for you to dish out guaranteed contracts. Other leagues have done it, and it's the norm there. And as Jim Irsay here said, saying from what he's seen from those leagues, he doesn't see it as a positive competitively. Some ways it has been, for sure. Certain players that get guaranteed deals, but other ways it hasn't been. And the NFL is much more of a violent sport than the NBA, than Major League Baseball. There's much greater chance for your investment, if you're an owner, to come back either shallow or even empty if you give a deal that you're not that is fully guaranteed, because the injury rate in the NFL is 100%. You go out and you give Lamar Jackson a fully guaranteed deal, and he tears his other ACL. And to be honest, if he's like, I'm going to bring up Carson Wentz again because it's what I do on this podcast. You should know this by now. But if it's anything like his injury that he had at the end of his what would have been an MVP season, and he's just not the same guy anymore, then Lamar Jackson's not going to be the same guy anymore. Like, look back to that year of Carson Wentz and his MVP caliber season when he was throwing and running the ball at an elite rate. That's what gave the Eagles their home field advantage. It allowed Nick Foles to take over there at the end of the season and get them through the playoffs and get them to the Super Bowl and win the Super Bowl eventually. They don't win that Super Bowl if it's not for Carson Wentz and the 13, 14 games that he played first before Nick Foles came and took in because of his elite play that enabled them to get that. Like I said, the home field advantage. Anyway, but he's not the same quarterback now, not even close to the same quarterback that he was when he was running and then got hit diving in for a touchdown against the Rams. I still see it replaying in my mind as an Eagles fan back there that, boom, the season's over, but then miraculously the season was not over. Sorry, going down my own rabbit hole. But all that to say, the guaranteed contracts in the NFL, if there is one sport, Joe, to not have guaranteed contracts from an owner's perspective, it's the NFL because of the danger that every player goes through. But then again, from the player's perspective, then there's no better league to have guaranteed contracts in the NFL because they're putting their bodies on the line. So I know it's a back and forth. It's a worker. It's an owner thing. It's a tale as old as time when it comes to the like I said, the owner and the worker in any business. But here in the NFL, that's not how things are right now. If the players want more guaranteed deals, then that's something that needs to be collectively bargained because I don't think even an owner like Jim Irsay is going to take that step and make this the new norm.
And I think that will be a big deal in the next collective bargaining agreement. And I think, not to spend too much time on this specifically, but I think what the owners could do and what they should do is rather than the guaranteeing contracts, they put a lot more of their money into making sure that the NFL takes much better care of these players after they're done playing football and making those NFL paychecks because how they take care of a lot of these players is egregious. But we don't have time to get into all of that right now. But another thing that's a great point in terms of not being the same player anymore, there's no guarantee. It's inarguable that what makes Lamar Jackson so elite is his athleticism, his ability to run for first downs, for touchdowns, to escape the pocket and make, second, third, fourth, fifth chance throws on a play that has broken down. That's what makes him elite. And if he loses that ability or even just loses his step, he's not the same player anymore. And he is a good passer, but you take away that running ability, I'm not even sure he's a top 15 quarterback in the NFL on passing alone. And I don't think that's very controversial to say. He can make some great throws out there. I'm not arguing against that.
But that's the thing, like 15 to 25 to 32, those quarterbacks can all make good throws out there.
Exactly. And so when you look at quarterbacks like a Cam Newton, who when he hit the cliff, that cliff was steep and he fell off quickly because what made him as elite was his athleticism. And all of a sudden when all he had was his arm, and even his arm fell off, that's kind of a different thing because he had a shoulder injury, and so his arm fell off as well. But who's to say a shoulder injury couldn't happen to Lamar Jackson? So when just looking at Jackson and looking at his ability to sustain his level of play 5-10 years down the road, it's something that's a very legitimate question for someone who bases so much of their game off of their immaculate athleticism.
Which is what we said kind of a couple weeks ago when we discussed this as well. Getting a little bit more in depth today since we've heard from Irsay, we've heard from Ballard, but like just those injuries scare the heck out of me, out of you, out of Mike. If he could stay healthy, sure, you'd love it, but there's just no guarantee that he will. So, what does Hancock Health's membership at the Mayo Clinic Care Network mean for you? It means our independent health network now has access to the knowledge and resources of the world leader in medicine. It means your Hancock Health doctor can now consult with Mayo Clinic specialists to confirm a diagnosis or treatment plan. And it means that together we're making health possible for you. Learn more about our new clinical collaboration at hancockregional.org/Mayo Clinic. Need new windows? Contact your hometown team today. Hometown Window and Doors are Central Indiana's premier locally owned full-service Anderson window dealer with master installers. From design to installation, the Hometown team handles it all. They carry unlimited options with competitive pricing. Call them direct to get 25% off your windows if you call within the next 60 days. Hometown Window and Doors gives you all the perks of a national brand with a hometown feel. Visit them at hometownwindowteam.com today. Plenty more coming from the NFL owners' meetings from Chris Ballard specifically, talking about the future of this franchise and their top draft pick this year at number 4 overall, coming 1 month from now. Here's Chris Ballard on not trading for that number 1 pick, which Carolina was clearly willing to make that deal. He wasn't at the time. Quote, "Didn't want to make a blind decision without all the information. And I know for people they might not understand that, but history just kind of tells you that when you do that, you better know what you're getting. We weren't quite ready to do that at that time." I would love to ask him then, well, would you do it now?
Yeah, at that time.
At that time was weird. But at the same time, like they were asking him about the trade, and he has to view it in time frame. So it's quite possible that the answer would be the same at this time too. But clearly Carolina was willing to take a leap, Joe, that he wasn't. So that says that Chris Ballard and the Colts staff are still kind of wading through the consistencies and inconsistencies of these top quarterback prospects in this draft. And it's clear that those inconsistencies are not shallow if they're going through this much, or at least for every quarterback, there are some issues, because if he's not willing to pull the trigger for one, then you can thus infer that all of them have their problems that they're trying to work out and figure out how they can fix, how they can coach, how they can mitigate, whatever it might be. So that's why Ballard says that they were not in the market for that trade up to number 1.
Sure, and the same might have been the case, and could be the case, has reported to have been the case with Carolina as well, in that they just traded up there and then they were going to hammer down which quarterback they were going to go with. They just had a different mindset about it, in that they thought there was enough talent amongst the quarterback group at the top of the draft that they said, you know what, we're going to go up to number 1. We're going to take our pick of the quarterbacks in this draft and start a new era of our franchise with our choice of franchise quarterback, which we'll see what method ends up working out here. Very different, I guess, way to go about it in Frank Reich's new team than with his old team. But Chris Ballard, a very calculated, as we know, GM who doesn't just take chances without feeling really good about what he's doing. And so without knowing exactly which quarterback they wanted, or at least being completely sold on a quarterback at that point in the draft, they weren't willing to cough up the tremendous asking price that the Bears were able to get paid.
And here is Chris Ballard on drafting a quarterback, just in general. Quote, "If you don't feel like you have one that can absolutely change the franchise in terms of leading you every year, I think you're always going to feel some pressure to get that player. Now, whether we need to take one at 4, if the right one's there for us that we feel good about, then we'll do it. At the end of the day, we feel good at 4. I'm not saying we won't move up, and I'm not saying we won't move back. I'm saying we're still doing our work." Gotta love to hear that. "When the moment comes, then we'll make a decision. Everybody talks about the top 4, but there's some more guys out there. There's some pretty good players. I think history's shown, especially in the past few years, with Jalen Hurts being one, Brock Purdy coming in and playing really well. They come at every level." And I'll just say to that Chris Ballard could have taken Jalen Hurts twice if he wanted to. So that's
taken Brock Purdy like 7 or 8 times.
Exactly. That's all hindsight's 20/20 there. But anyway, right now, no, like we've said here again over the past couple weeks, no one's going to completely open their playbook for you. They'll be honest in some aspects, but when you look at that quote, I think it's mostly honest, but I also think that there's a way he's leaning that he's just not telling everybody whether they want to move up, they want to stay put, or they want to move back. And with his history, you could clearly understand that you would think, well, it's probably I want to move back because he always moves back. That's what he does. And if he wasn't willing to trade up to number 1, then if you're going to take the third choice at quarterback, whoever falls to you, then I could understand again why Chris Ballard would be thinking about moving back. And says he doesn't feel pressure to take a quarterback there at 4, but boy, you got to solve that. As we've said, you got to solve that quarterback problem somehow. And with where they are this year, it just seems like it's the year to do that. I mean, they need a quarterback. That's what I keep coming back to. Like, they just need a quarterback desperately, completely. Whether it's trading for Lamar Jackson or going for one of these guys, like it needs to be a quarterback. So if they trade down, if they're trading down to draft, I don't know, Hendon Hooker at, 9 or whatever, or 15, or then that's one way to do it. That would kind of be intriguing or interesting. But if it ends up that they either stick at 4 and draft Will Anderson or trade down and draft a cornerback, boy, I think that would be a really tough sell for this front office and for this unit. And it would put everyone, all of those 3, Irsay, Ballard, Steichen, even on quite the difficult position when they're talking to us about their decision making, because it just looks like the opportunity's out there this year, and if you don't seize that opportunity, it's going to be, I think it's going to be negative for you. So
if Chris Ballard doesn't take a quarterback in the first round of this draft, there's going to be a petition started like there was with Jeff Saturday to get him out of town. That's just the facts of the matter. And I've been questioning for weeks now why Chris Ballard is still the GM of this team. He has a chance to shut me up and prove me wrong by taking a good quarterback in this draft and finally solving the problem that he hasn't been able to solve in several years now. Not that it's an easy problem to solve, but it's a problem that it's his job to fix. I think he's trying to keep a lot of options open because he's stated repeatedly that he doesn't want to take a quarterback just to take a quarterback if he doesn't believe that quarterback is going to be successful. So I could see a lot of scenarios going on. Let's just say, because this is my preference, I love Anthony Richardson, and I'm not so high on Will Levis. And so if the Colts feel the same way, and, ideally they would just stay at 4 and be able to take Richardson. But the Cardinals are open for business with that 3rd overall pick, as far as we know, unless they absolutely love like a Will Anderson or something like that. And there's other teams that need quarterbacks in this draft who would probably be willing to move up to 3 to go get Richardson or Levis or whoever their guy might be. And so maybe the Colts, if the asking price isn't too high, they move up 1 spot just to secure Richardson. Maybe they don't feel the pressure to do so, and they end up just being able to land him at 4 because we know Chris Ballard's cheap, and he's not just going to give away draft picks just to do so. Maybe Richardson, maybe they play the whole thing wrong. Richardson goes right before them. They don't believe in Levis, and so they say, you know what, we like Hooker just as much as Levis. Let's take Will Anderson with the 4th pick to get that stud DN, that pass rusher that we've been hunting for years. And then we'll trade back into the 1st round and go get Hooker. Maybe they just trade back from 4, acquire more picks, and take Hooker. That'd be a very Chris Ballard thing to do, although I'd rather just get an elite player at 4 because Chris Ballard's been swinging and missing on defensive ends for much of his tenure with the Colts. So I think he's just trying to keep all those options and scenarios open and available and keep the fans open to a lot of those options, because the Colts aren't really in a position where they control their own destiny that much. They have external factors impacting who they're going to be able to take. And a big reason for that is because they didn't trade up to number 1, which, I'm not sure they could have matched that asking price. Carolina gave up quite a bit. But being in the position that they're at, if they want to get the third. If they want the choice at the third quarterback in this draft, they're going to have to trade up. And Ballard, I think, is going to make sure he has to do that before he does it.
Some more outside of quarterback news from the Colts at the NFL owners' meetings. Chris Ballard said that they are sticking with Ryan Kelly at center and Kenny Moore at cornerback right now, despite some trade interest from them over the past couple weeks. From Ballard, quote, "We had some calls on them, but at the end of the day, they're good football players for us."
Can you use your Ballard voice?
Oh, they're good football players for us. When you got a good football player, that's a great person, good fit. It makes it hard to move away from those guys. So,
thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. My pleasure to bring it in every once in a while. Yeah.
Not surprised by Ryan Kelly. We've kind of talked through this. I was shocked about Kenny Moore. I really am. We've talked about how he wasn't a good fit in Gus Bradley's defense.
Sure didn't look it, at least, yeah.
No, and he had his worst season in several years in this new defense. They could save $8 million by cutting him and have zero dead cap. He's in the final year of his contract. I think he's about to be 28. So this kind of just tells me that they're about done this offseason. That tells me they don't have plans on what they would do with that extra $8 million. I think they're sitting around $20 million right now, and that basically tells me that, you know what, we might, especially after getting rid of Gilmore, corner's already a need for us. Let's just go ahead and keep Kenny Moore because we don't know what we would do with that extra $8 million anyway, so let's just keep him on the team, which isn't very encouraging to someone like me who's looking at this roster and seeing a lot of holes, like outside cornerback, where going into the season right now, they would be starting 2 undrafted players outside cornerback between Dallas Flowers and Isaiah Rodgers was a seventh round pick. Okay, undrafted player and a 7th round pick, exactly. Now, I do like their talent, but that's not a good strategy. Looking at the offensive line, which hasn't been addressed at all. I'll just go ahead and bring up this point. Matt Pryor is signed with the 49ers after a couple seasons with the Colts. So while Matt Pryor was awful for the Colts last year, that still eats away at their already lacking depth on the offensive line. So I'm kind of scratching my head about what the Colts' overall plan is. It seems to me that they hope they can just draft a rookie quarterback, plop him in there, give him a year or two, and that this roster can just pick up where it left off in the Phillip River year and in the first 3/4 of the Carson Wentz year, where they look like somebody that no one wanted to play in the playoffs. But I don't see like an overall theme to this offseason so far.
Need new windows? Let the Hometown team help. Hometown Windows and Doors is Central Indiana's premier locally owned full-service Anderson dealer with master installers. From design to installation, we handle it all, carrying nationally known brands like Anderson with more options and competitive pricing. Call us direct and get 25% off your windows if you buy within the next 60 days.
Please contact your Hometown team today. We are Central Indiana's premier locally owned full-service Anderson dealer.
National brand, hometown feel.
The story of Hancock Health is all about you and everything you need to live your healthiest life. Like Hancock Regional, one of the nation's safest hospitals, and an independent health network with over 70 doctors at more than 30 locations around East Central Indiana. We're growing and evolving to help further your story. And we're just getting started. See all the ways Hancock Health and you can work together to make health possible at hancockhealth.org.
Well, so far the Colts have made themselves cornerback on defense by trading away Stephon Gilmore, and Brandon Faison went and moved to. Did he go back to Oakland or Vegas too?
He did. Yeah,
he went back to Vegas. So both of their starting cornerbacks for most of last season, excuse me, are gone. So we just outlined where they would be without him. Outside of those top 3 of Rodgers, Flowers, and Kenny Moore, there's Tony Brown, who re-signed this offseason for cheap, more of a special teams player, Kevin Tolliver, Darrell Baker Jr., and David Vereen. And if you don't know who those guys are, welcome to the club. So you figure, Joe, that Chris Ballard is going to have to use some kind of draft capital to address this position. And higher draft capital might be ideal because of the lack of top-end talent right here in this group. And I don't want to say that as anything detrimental to the guys that are there, but there's a reason that Isaiah Rodgers fell to the end of the draft. There's a reason that Dallas Flowers was not taken in the draft.
And hopefully they'll both be, steals.
I'd love
the Colts,
it. I'd
diamonds
love
in the rough. But
Yeah.
it's just not a good team building strategy
to bet on diamonds in the rough.
Yes.
Right. You want some blue chips. And the blue chips for this NFL draft at cornerback, first round virtual locks that you see, it appears to be a pretty good year for cornerbacks. So the Colts they have that going for them. They have a lot of options. Christian Gonzalez from Oregon appears to be in kind of a league of his own at the top. After that, not far behind are Devin Witherspoon of Illinois, Joey Porter Jr. Penn State, Deontay Banks of Maryland, all thought to be really good first-round players. Joe, unless there is a scenario where Chris Ballard does trade down and gather more picks, it's very unlikely one of these four guys would fall to them at any point in the first round of the draft.
Yeah, or maybe a video of them, smoking out of a gas mask comes out on draft night. I don't see them falling.
When would that
out of the
happen?
first round.
Yeah.
Which that probably wouldn't even have the impact it used to with, marijuana becoming
Probably not.
more and more illegal. And
Might be encouraged.
many of these states. Oh, yeah, Oregon, Illinois, Pennsylvania, Maryland. I'm pretty sure it's legal in all those states.
There you go. Boom. So after that, you get into the guys who could be first round, maybe into the second round. And the Colts, as of now, do have a really high pick in the second round, Joe, because they were one of the worst teams in the NFL last year. They were bad. At this point, it's good that they were bad because you got these picks. But you got Keely Ringo out of Georgia, who could be a safety in the NFL. Some are thinking about that. This is from us right now, just so we're completely on a level playing field out there with all you listening. Joe and I are not scouts, but we do read a lot of scouts. So we're kind of putting together knowledge that we've gained that way.
I'm not breaking down tape in the evenings.
Right.
Or anything
it's
like
for
that.
me. Yeah. It's a different bunch of knowledge than I try to give for the rest of the show. I think I have at least a little bit more expertise at some other things that we discuss. This is not exactly one of those things. It's just a matter of it's more a matter of reading what other people have to say and kind of bringing all their opinions together and delivering it to you. But some other cornerbacks that could be taken. Emmanuel Forbes out of Mississippi State. We should have brought Chris Hagan on to give his rundown of this guy. He's 6'1", but only 166 pounds, Joe.
Pretty light.
Like, I could get to 166 pounds if I tried, I think. I might need a little bit of work to get there. But that is light in the NFL. You're going to get, A, pushed around by physical receivers out in routes, and 2, perhaps more importantly, in the run game. They're going to block you into oblivion. They're going to run stretch plays to your side, and that's a real mismatch in the NFL if you have a corner that's less than 170 pounds.
Yeah, Forbes is a guy who, if he was maybe 180, he'd probably be in that first group with the first round locks. But that's quite a question. I think it was the lightest cornerback in the combine in like 10 years or something like that. So he's going to have to put some weight on to play in the league.
But I think Chris Hagan would say, well, he did it in the SEC, right? Just means more in the SEC. So he clearly has talent, and that's why you still think that he could be a second round prospect, or maybe even the end of the first round. If somebody really falls in love with him, looks at his frame, and thinks, yeah, we can get him up to 180 pounds if we bring him in and get him in our weight program, getting in our nutrition program. So,
and he had 6 pick sixes in his college career. That's pretty darn good.
That is really good. So you got a nose for the ball. That'll make up for some of those deficiencies. Cam Smith out of South Carolina, 6'1", 180. There he is, right there. There's that benchmark. Runs a 4.43, so that's a little bit slower than Forbes, who ran a 4.35 40-yard dash. But another solid vertical, good arms. Every one of these guys has some kind of a knock when you get into second and third round picks. So when you look at different things where they say, well, this guy doesn't mirror wide receivers well through transitions. This guy, Tyreek Stevenson, has some busts in the zone and recognizing different route patterns that come out from different teams. When you get into here, so much relies on the fit in your scheme. Because if you're fit, Joe, if you don't need him to mirror receivers as well through transitions, if you're going to pass him off from this zone to another zone, and you're going to run zone 85% of the time, then Cam Smith is much more valuable to you than if you're a strict man-to-man team that plays man 95% of the time and wants to put your cornerbacks one-on-one with these guys. and is a heavy pressure team that wants to get after the quarterback. So you can find guys. That's why you can find guys. That's why I think Chris Ballard thinks you can find guys in the second round being so valuable, because a lot of these guys have first-round traits, but they have other areas in their development, in their skill set, that are just not good. But you're not going to ask them to do these things at the NFL level. So that's why these second-round picks can become incredibly valuable for NFL teams.
Yeah, they have some kind of hole in their game that gives teams pause, or at least some teams pause, and so maybe you're only on the draft board for half the NFL teams, because other NFL teams would want you to do something you're not good at, and then you end up falling to the second round. So looking at what the Colts probably are looking for in a quarterback, we know size in Gus Bradley's scheme. The perfect cornerback for his scheme was Richard Sherman. So he was incredibly smart, physical, had the size, had the ball skills to take the ball away, anticipation, being able to recognize route concepts and be where he's supposed to be at all times.
Was he like a 4th or a 5th round pick? I forget.
He was.
He was not like a high draft pick. But he fit well into their scheme, and he developed beautifully.
Exactly. And obviously the temperament. He had the temperament to excel as well. But just looking at, the type of cornerbacks that fit that, Ringo at Georgia, 6'2", 207 pounds, certainly has the size they're looking for, 4.3, 6
and speed. Yeah, geez. If you're 6'2", 200 pounds and run 4.36, Chris Ballard's gonna want you on his team. But it's just a matter of actually getting to you at some point. So.
Exactly. Forbes has the height. I'm just not sure he has the weight. Looking at Julius Brents from Kansas State, 6'3", 200 pounds, 41.5-inch vertical and 34-inch arms. I think that's going to be somebody the Colts might target. He only ran a 4.53 40, which was about the same 40 Vontae Davis ran back in the day for the Colts. So, it's definitely not a deal breaker to run a 40. And I think top end speed is one of the knocks he won't be going in the first. One of the reasons he won't be going in the first round. But I think Brent can certainly fit into this scheme and be a player that the Colts keep an eye on. Some other good cornerbacks like Garrett Williams, DJ out of Syracuse.
Let's go, Garrett Williams. Come on now.
DJ Turner out of Michigan. These are some of the smaller cornerbacks, 5'10", 5'11", who might not, especially Turner, 5'11", 178, less than 31-inch arms, might not have the length the Colts are looking for. Williams, you might be able to speak more to him than I would, but he tore his ACL in October, so I know that's going to bump him down draft boards a little bit.
Yeah, you're not going to get, I don't think, a lot, especially early this next season from him, because it's going to take a while to rehab that, and then you finally get him in camp, and then he's starting just behind everybody else. So if you're going to draft him, you're not relying on him to be a significant contributor right away. It'll be more like what Dallas Flowers was last year, to be perfectly honest. It'll be a guy who is on the practice squad early, or even just low on the roster if you want to keep him there, ensure that he stays on your team. And you're just giving him a, what's it called? Like, you're making him inactive every week because he's just not going to be ready. But these guys down here in the lower tier, the lower draft rounds, or at least projected to go down here, who are cornerbacks, you see a lot of guys who are smaller at 5'11", 5'10", but were still very productive in college. So these guys found schemes that fit them very well in college. It's a matter of whether they can do the same in the NFL and also match up with the level of physicality and speed and everything just being heightened for them. And Williams was a really good corner. He was all ACC player when he was a freshman, sophomore, and junior in 2020, 2021, 2022. And then he got knocked. He tore his ACL. Like, Syracuse had two really good corners for a while with him and Deuce Chestnut, who transferred to LSU. If LSU is taking you on as a defensive back, you're a pretty good player in the transfer portal. So Garrett and Deuce were both really good players for them. It was tough to throw on the outside against Syracuse. So I like Williams a lot. He's definitely smaller. He's not what Chris Ballard's ideal cornerback is. We all know the story of Kenny Moore being smaller and him just having to take him kicking and screaming off the Patriots practice squad because the Colts just needed bodies at cornerback, and he was a body out there. So to draft someone like a Garrett Williams, I don't know if Chris Ballard has that in him. I really don't. I think he's going to take more shots at a guy like a Rodney Thomas at the end of the draft last year, who has some physical tools, who has speed, and can develop well, you think, with those tools and speed and size at the NFL level. And we saw Thomas play very well last year for the Colts throughout the vast majority of the season, taking the starting reins from even a guy like a Nick Cross, who was drafted way up in the third round that you expected more of going into the year. So that's what Chris Ballard has more on his mind, to find more traits, I think, near the bottom of the draft, at least if history has anything to say about it. So it's more, it would be less likely, I think, for them to take a guy like Garrett Williams, more likely for them to take a guy like Julius Brents, who you mentioned out of Kansas State, who's 6'3", 200 pounds, not the fastest guy in the world, but still big vertical, big arms. And if you're not asking him to run deep with receivers, if you try to work on footwork, you work on hip flexibility, you work on positioning, he could be a really good corner in the system that they have currently under Gus Bradley. So.
Yeah, and I think he makes a lot of sense maybe in the third round if he lasts that long, or maybe they trade back in the second and gain more picks and still take him if that's their target. But just looking at their picks here, they have the 35th overall pick. That's high in the second round. Third round pick's not quite as high because they don't have their own pick. They have Washington's pick, and Washington did much better than Indianapolis this past year. So that's 79th overall. And then fourth round, they have 106, and then they have 2 fifth-round picks. One their own, 138th, and then one from Buffalo, and then Nyheim Hines trade, 162. I would say cornerback is one of the bigger needs on this team.
Has to be.
I would say I would be surprised if they don't take one within the first 4 rounds, I would say. But the only thing that would give me pause against taking one maybe in round 2 is that you're trying to give your assumably rookie quarterback every chance possible to succeed. And so if it's between a cornerback or maybe a guard you feel really good about, another wide receiver, something along the offense that's going to help your quarterback, I would lean on the offensive side of the ball, just because that's the most important thing to do right now, is make sure that you can score points and that the quarterback can come in and lead the team to success. And then maybe the next year or two, you figure out a way to shore up the defense.
Completely. And I'm on the exact same page as you. We sit here and we say the Colts are in desperate need of a cornerback, and they really are in desperate need of a cornerback. But that doesn't change the fact that this offense was one of the worst in the NFL last year. So if you're going to bring back the dartboard analogy, if you're going to throw darts at one side, it's got to be offense right now, because you need help up and down on offense to be better than you were. And last year, the defense was very good until the end of the year, when they just got completely worn down and couldn't keep up with anybody. You can tell by the second half collapse in Minnesota, the fourth quarter collapse in Dallas, that they were tired. They were done. They were beat. They had carried this team as much as they could. And even if you got to a week and you were ready to go in the first quarter, by the third and fourth quarter, again, all that gas, all that juice was completely gone. Yeah. So you hope that Shaquille Leonard, is healthy himself. That would help. He always brings the juice himself. You know it.
Do you think it's interesting, because I found it a bit interesting, that they traded away Stephon Gilmore, who was one of the best players on the team last year for cap reasons, but they kept Kenny Moore, who struggled. I would say maybe that was as much for Gilmore. Maybe Gilmore came to the team and said, hey, I'm not in for a rebuild. I came here because I thought we were going to contend. And then they traded him away to a contender because he really doesn't fit with their timeline anymore. I think he's going to play at age 33 this year.
Yep.
But I just think it's interesting that you ship off a better player for like a 5th-round pick or something like that, but you keep and you pay somebody $8 million who really wasn't that productive for you. It's head-scratching to me.
It doesn't strike you externally as a good business decision completely. And I see that. I absolutely see that. I think it definitely goes to your point that when they signed him, when they signed Gilmore, they signed him with the expectation that he was a missing piece of making a run at a conference title and a Super Bowl if possible. And when you go into an offseason after that, there's some kind of like promises made, maybe not promises made, but expectations made with him as opposed to expectations with Kenny. Like he's been here for a while, so he's kind of more part you think maybe he's more part of this
framework
franchise
of
and the
team.
framework of the team, like for the ups and for the downs, whereas you brought in Gilmore specifically for an up, and it happened completely the opposite way. I'm not saying, again, this is the smartest business decision to get rid of the guy who was really productive and keep the guy who wasn't. But I don't know, maybe it's an honorable business decision.
Maybe it's just trying to do business the right way.
Honor doesn't win in the NFL,
No.
but it is something to be honorable in the NFL. And so that's I think that's the extent of my thoughts on the matter.
Yeah.
So I can understand what you're saying completely.
And, not that I think, the Colts' chances at the playoffs are gone now because Stephon Gilmore is not here. I don't think they're going to make the playoffs next year regardless, or at least the chances aren't very high. But I just thought, okay, they're trading away Gilmore. They're kind of tearing it down a little bit. I expect Kenny Moore to be next, maybe Ryan Kelly. There's been stuff about they could save money by trading away Mo Alley-Cox. And then the only piece that gets moved is Gilmore, who was the best of the bunch for you last year. It just kind of makes me question what the overall plan is with the team.
Well, the plan right now, Joe, is to just draft Will Anderson there at number 4 and then trade for Lamar Jackson, their next 2 first-round picks. And if he flames out in 4 years and the Colts have the number 1 overall pick, you draft Arch Manning, and everything is set. So
now I see.
There it is. There it all is right now. So you have Arch Manning, you have Will Anderson on one side, and there you are. You're set for the next 15 years of your franchise. So
I like it.
you heard it here first on the Colts Blue Zone podcast. To hear more tremendous analysis like that, you can follow us on Twitter at Colts Blue Zone. Also, subscribe to us. Make sure you get us delivered right to your podcast listening device when we drop Wednesdays or Thursdays throughout this offseason. And Mike will be back next week, but you can read all his work online at fox59.com, cbs4indy.com. Still got some great content going up there, even though he's not able to join us right now. So for Joe Hopkins, I'm Dave Griffiths. Appreciate you listening. We'll see you next week on the Colts Blue Zone podcast.